Pre-code horror and sci-fi comic book reprints. Part 2. The original reprints. Most pre-code horror and sci-fi comic books are in the public domain, so it is no surprise that there are seemingly endless reprints, starting with EERIE publications in the 1960s and continuing on today with stellar publishers like PS Art Books and IDW. There are a few things that constitute a decent reprint, depending on what you're looking for. Source material. The better the original source material and care taken to reproduce the most accurate image possible, the higher quality reprint you will have. Color reprints are much trickier, thus you have fewer publishing in full color, with the majority being simple black and white reprints. I first discovered reprints of pre-code comics when I was a kid and I happened to find some magazines from EERIE Publications in a store one day. At the time, I didn't realize magazines like Weird, Terror Tales, and Tales of Voodoo were simply reprints or redos of all of those pre-code comics from the 1950s. Myron Fass ran EERIE Publications, and he himself drew comics and did covers for 1950s publishing houses like Toby, contributing to titles like Tales of Horror, and covers of issues like this gem from Beware, drawn by Fass, depicting himself being attacked by monsters. So the fact that Myron Fass figured out a way to milk those pre-code tales for many more years is not surprising. It was many years later that I realized that what EERIE Publications had done, so I ended up collecting more to get those reprints. The redrawn pre-code stories in EERIE pubs were often quite good, as Fass employed many talented South American artists to churn out the pages. Overall, one might think of EERIE Publications as a kind of clickbait operation. The incredibly gory covers of vampires attacking a scantily clad woman while being skewed through the heart by a crazy-looking werewolf never showed up as stories in the magazines themselves. But if you want to up your gore game, I highly recommend getting at least a few magazines from EERIE Publications for the decent black and white reprints and the insanely over-the-top violent monster covers. eBay and a few other sellers have them running anywhere from $10 to perhaps a few $100 for the rarest issues in good shape. And now, a tasty little anecdote. In 1965, Myron Fass ended up calling his horror comics publishing company EERIE Publications after being bettered by Warren Publishing. His original idea was to call his first magazine EERIE, but Warren struck at the midnight hour and released an ash can version of EERIE Magazine, beating Fass to the punch and securing the name EERIE for his own title. The ash can version of EERIE number 1, which is simply a black and white staple-bound quick print, can be found on eBay or other collector sites and seem to range between $800 and $1,500. This is why the first full-fledged issue of EERIE to hit the stands was issue number 2. The good news is that you can get a photocopy of EERIE number 1 on eBay for around $10 to $15. It is interesting to note that around this time, early to late 60s, a UK publisher called Super Comics also published pre-code reprints in comic book form. For example, they published EERIE Tales number 12, which was a reprint of Avon Periodical's EERIE number 1 from 1951. Stanley Morse, one of the more infamous pre-code players back in the day with titles like Mr. Mystery and Weird Tales of the Future, also jumped into the pre-code reprint game in the late 60s with Chilling Tales of Horror magazine in 1969. Stanley Publications had other pre-code reprint titles like Ghoul Tales and Shock. In the case of Stanley Morse, he literally reprinted the original stories, including some of the original covers. For example, Shock number 1 has the cover of Weird Chills number 1, which was originally done by the great Bernard Bailey, although many of their covers were done by modern artists. A lot of these are available online, particularly on eBay, and are not very expensive, running between 10 to 50 bucks depending on condition. This concludes part 2 of the series. In the next part, we dive into latter-day reprints from the 1990s and on. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.